Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Dylan Goldby. Today I'm out on Bunpo Bridge on the Han River in Seoul, and I'm out here today as part of my testing for the Samyang Rokinon 12mm f2 autofocus for the Fujifilm X system. And what I've got for a composition today is quite simple. We're doing a bit of a blue hour cityscape, and so what I thought I would do was to answer a viewer question while we're out here. And on my previous introduction to composition video, I had a viewer ask me, well, I'm an amateur and I have a lot of different interests in photography. I'd like to shoot some seascapes, some woodlands, some close-ups of flowers, some shots of my family and things like that, maybe some architecture. And I'm having trouble sort of nailing down what I exactly want to do and how to focus my creative energies. And so I thought that, well, since I'm a family photographer by trade, who has an ongoing personal project on facial tattoos, and tonight I'm out here on a bridge doing a nighttime cityscape, that I might spend some time talking a little bit about that from the perspective of somebody who could probably be very well diagnosed on some sort of spectrum of not being able to concentrate so well. So we're going to get into that topic today, but before we do that, let's take a quick look at the composition that I've got tonight and the considerations that went into it.
Okay, so here we have the composition that I settled on. Now, I've decided to do a voiceover for this because for some reason when I turned the camera around this way, I ended up with some interference from the surrounding electronics, and it sounded a lot like what you might have heard in the 1G and 2G days of phones when they used to interfere with radios and computer speakers and all of that. So not that much fun to listen to, I imagine. But what we're looking at here is the Sebetsom, which is the floating islands here in Seoul. And I'm standing up on Bunpo Bridge looking down at them. So basically I can move left and I can move right to be able to change this composition a little bit. And we see here two of the floating islands. There's actually a third one that is behind the island on the right, but I chose my position here to basically completely obscure that and to allow for the buildings on the right hand side to not really intersect too much with the island on the right. The reason I chose this subject for this lens test is that we do have quite a few sharp lines on the buildings there. There's also a few pin lights around so I can check whether the sun stars will render well, and it's also a really nice scene where you get a sense of the blue hour city behind, as well as the beautiful colors that light up on these buildings. Since there was quite a bit of wind, the ripples in the water were a little bit distracting to me, and I wanted to smooth them out with a slightly longer exposure. So I ended up settling on f11, which gave me around about a 2-second exposure and allowed me to blur out the water a little bit there. I also ramped up my ISO and used a slightly wider aperture to make a second frame with a couple walking down the bridge in the center there that I could then paint in later if I wanted to have some sort of a focal point along the bridge as well. Now 12mm is a little bit wide for the composition that I chose, and I think something more like 18mm would have been a little bit better for this scene. I could have produced a 16:9 that would have looked quite good at that focal length. However, with the 12mm, I can always crop in and get the scene that I want, and that is one of the things that a little bit of a trade-off when you work with prime lenses.
Now back to the viewer question. Now before we get into my ideas on how it is that you can start to focus your creative energies and make the best use of your time, I'd like to ask that if you're not a working professional, do you really need to? Now, as a working professional, there's definitely an argument to be made for honing your skills in a specific area and becoming the best of the best, the go-to person for that area. That's the base for a solid business plan. But if you don't have clients to answer to and you don't have bills to pay, is there really a need to focus those energies? So when it comes to my business, I do focus my energies in a few key areas, and I don't typically take on work that doesn't fit into those categories. However, as you can see right now, in my own time, I do go out and photograph various things that interest me. I basically get out to exercise those creative muscles, as it were, and make work that I can't do on paid time. So, since it's absolutely freezing out here and my lips are barely moving, I'm going to get home and we're going to discuss the rest of this in the comfort of a warm office.
Okay, so we're back in the office now, away from that freezing cold wind, and I've got a nice warm drink to sort of get myself warmed up a little bit. And I want to unpack that question a little bit more about how is it that we go about finding a direction for our photography and focusing our energy on just one thing. Now, again, we're going to be talking about amateur photographers in the sense that, this is not work that's being done for a client to a brief. You don't have to produce for anybody except for yourself. And so the nature of this work and the nature of that decision is going to be a very personal one. This is not something that perhaps I can give you an exact answer to, but I do want to talk a little bit about my process, and I want to give you a couple of examples of me and an example of a friend of mine to sort of show you how we came to choose the directions that we've decided to work in. It's important to note that the ideas in this video are just my own. They haven't been handed down on high. This is not something that I've learned from somebody else. So I do encourage you to pick and choose, take what you think might work for you, and for the rest of it, just take it with a grain, possibly even an unhealthy helping of salt. So let's jump into it. The first thing that I would encourage you to do is to sort of start digging deep and figure out what it is that makes you want to pick up the camera. Do you enjoy a particular subject matter? Do you love the process of learning to use the camera itself? Do you love post-production? Is there something else surrounding the photography that you love? Do you love going for long walks on the beach and that inspires you to make photographs? Take a good hard look at what it is that makes you want to make images. Also at this time, it's a good idea to consider what you might like to do with those photos. I mean, do you want to create a perfectly curated Instagram feed? Do you want to have 10 or 20 images on a gallery wall? Do you want to make a calendar to hand out to your community at the end of the year? Or maybe a small photo book to give to friends and family at the holiday time? These sorts of things will help you to choose the sort of subject matter you're going to shoot and how you're going to shoot it. It's perfectly fine not to have all of this figured out in the beginning. This is an evolving process. And again, there's nothing that says you can't just love it all and enjoy photography for the sake of doing photography. Now, for me, I really love the experiences that my camera gives me. And for work, I'm primarily a family photographer, which means that I get to meet up with families and their young children and make photographs of them interacting, laughing, smiling together, hopefully create some memories that will last a lifetime and end up in, family albums and on the walls. And then when I'm done with that, my personal work takes me out to, explore the world. I like to visit new places, see new things. I also like to meet new people and hear their stories. And I like to play with a new lens as much as the next person. So getting out there and testing my new equipment and seeing what it can bring to the table for my photography is another part of the things that I love about this art. And when it comes to the output for my photography, my work often finds its way, as I said, into family albums and onto Christmas cards and things like that. But some of the other work that I do, say for corporate clients, ends up on their Instagram and their Facebook feeds to announce the different things that they're doing. And when I go out and do, say, an editorial assignment, the travel images that I shoot might end up in an in-flight magazine, something like that. When it comes to my own personal work, I love to maybe print a few images into a book when I finish a trip. I also like to put some larger prints on the walls of my house. And when it comes to my Tattoos of Asia project, I'm heading towards producing our final book. The next thing that I encourage you to do is to keep a list of all the things you might want to photograph. And I do this in Dropbox paper, so I've got a little digital file that's available on my desktop and also on my phone. So at any time, in any place, if I have an idea, I can quickly note it down and take a look at it later. And this list isn't one of those things that sort of I'm going to do this first, second, third, and fourth. It's an ever sort of evolving list of just random ideas that I put down to make sure that, things don't escape me. And maybe later on, I'll come back to it and I'll think, yes, this is the time and place to do this. Or, maybe one day I find myself with some free time, I'm in a certain place and I'm not sure what I should shoot. I go back and I look at this and I think, aha, I remember thinking about this. Let's go and see what we can do. I have a good friend, Greg Samborski, who lived in Korea for a lot of years, and while he was here, he was working full-time as a photographer, doing corporate events and couples and commercial work and things like that. And in the back of his mind, he always had this project that he wanted to do, and he was always making notes about it. He wanted to involve his love for motorcycles and his love for photography in a single project. And the community here just didn't really give him the opportunity to express himself in the way that he wanted to. He didn't have the people and the places and the resources that he needed to be able to do it, but he kept these ideas down on paper, and eventually when he moved back to Canada, he found that tribe, that group of people who could allow him to do this. He found the places, he found the opportunities to do it. And now I'll link to that below, because it's not only an interesting project, it's also an interesting look at how you can create two different types of work, how you can keep an idea in the back of your mind until it's ready to happen, and then once it is, to start making it happen and to allow that to evolve in the way that it will. Now, the final part of this process for me is to get out the door and just start making photographs. You can make all the lists in the world and think about this as much as you possibly can, but in the end, no photographs are going to get made until you actually pick up a camera and get out and do it. Now, at this stage, I wouldn't say, trying to explore something extremely deeply is a good idea. I would say go and photograph a lot of things on the surface. If you have, an interest in street photography, go make some street images. If you have an interest in seascapes, go make some seascapes. If you have an interest in woodland photography, go and do that. And then mix it in with those other types of photography as well. All the things that are in your list, the interests that you have, the places that you might want to visit, just start slowly ticking them off, giving them a go, and see what comes of them. You might find that while you have a keen interest in seascapes, the process of actually getting to the ocean from where you live is a bit of a hassle, and you find yourself spending a lot more time procrastinating and say, I'll just do it tomorrow, I'll drive out when the conditions are perfect. Or maybe you want to make some street images and the city's a little bit far away and you think, my town's kind of boring and it's just going to take me forever to get into the city and I probably won't come home with anything. The more of these sort of thoughts that happen, the less images get made. And this is why we have our lists, so that, if the situation or our mood or the light doesn't speak to a certain type of subject or a certain way of working, we have a few other things to fall back on that we can go and start, exploring in a bit of a different way and still be exercising our creativity, but not necessarily creating the specific thing that we think we should because this is our particular project at the moment. So you might start taking long walks on the beach in the morning and, in the beginning you might be photographing anything and everything, the sun coming up, the waves rolling in, the stones and pebbles on the beach, the old wood that washes up, anything that sort of catches your eye. And then over time you'll start to notice that, okay, I'm drawn to certain things. I like this type of light, or I like this subject, or this level of the tide. Perhaps I'll take my tripod out and start doing things in this particular way next time. And so rather than trying to force yourself to focus on something that maybe you won't enjoy when you start to explore it a little bit more deeply, I would suggest that you get out there and allow it to call to you rather than, sort of forcing your will upon it. Now, that's not to say that you should throw away the other types of images you wanted to make, so your long walks on the beach shouldn't prevent you from going to do street photography or woodland photography if you want to do it. But I would say that rather than saying, okay, for this 1 hour I will do this, for this 1 hour I will do this, I would suggest that you allow these subjects to call to you and allow the situations that you're in to at least inform the way that you might start to make photographs. So if you remember the story I told about my good friend Greg, he had all of these ideas, but no matter what he wanted, he couldn't force them to happen. He couldn't force them into existence in a place that really wouldn't allow for it. But now that the situation has arisen, he's able to make those photographs and he's able to make them in the way that he wanted to. Well, in that vein, my longest running personal project to date is my Tattoos of Asia project, and that focuses on tribal facial tattoos. And try as I might, there aren't too many of those around me, so I do have to travel to places at specific times and try to meet these people to be able to continue this project. The thing that I love most about this project is that it allows me to visit places that maybe I wouldn't otherwise visit, meet people and photograph people that I maybe wouldn't otherwise meet. And the same thing goes for the other images on this YouTube channel. So when you see me go out to Soroksan National Park and make some photos of the mountains in a typhoon, I'm doing that because I love the look of the old ink wash paintings, and to me I want to try and express a little bit of that in my photography as well. And when I go out to make street images, I'm going out because I want to explore a different part of the city and make some photographs that just to maybe exercise a little different part of my creativity. And that's not to say that these images are going to turn into projects the size of my Tattoos of Asia project or turn into a source of income for me. This is more just exercising my creativity, and they almost act as a palette cleanser of sorts. So after a month in the mountains photographing tattooed faces, or a week or 2 weeks of corporate events or family sessions or something like that, just to do something a little bit different, to sit on the side of the river and watch the fog rise off in autumn and make a few photos at sunrise. Something a little bit different, to just see things in a little bit of a different way for a while, make some photos of the beauty around me, and still enjoy the art and craft of photography. And that's not to say, though, that I haven't thrown out a lot of ideas along the way. So about 10 years ago or so, I started a project where I wanted to create these sort of almost science fiction, post-apocalyptic type of scenes. And I wanted to mesh some ideas that I'd had in a dream with learning Photoshop and learning some new techniques in photography. So I set out to start creating this set of images, and I got the first one done, and it took me 30, 40, 50 hours in Photoshop, something like that. I learned a whole lot from it. What I realized in the end is that I don't really have any love for this sort of heavy image manipulation and creating scenes from my mind. That part of the process of photography didn't really interest me, even though I thought it would. But I did learn things from it, and I'm able to use them in my current photography, but I didn't continue down that path. And that's okay. I feel like experimenting in different ways and learning new skills is all part of the process. So that would be my advice for trying to narrow down your focus in photography. I would say photograph a lot of things. Anything that catches your interest, make pictures of it. And if something starts to call to your soul, maybe explore it a little bit deeper and see where that path leads you. If something stops interesting you, well, throw it away, let it go. If there's no client behind this saying, okay, we've paid you for this and we now need you to produce certain things, then there's no real sense in holding on to something that you don't enjoy, and you can go back and experiment with other things, and then maybe eventually you'll find one thing that you really love doing. So I'd love to keep this discussion going down in the comments below. Are you an amateur who's found a direction in photography? If so, how did you do it? Was it just a bolt of lightning that struck you and said, you need to do this? Or was it a trial and error process? Or was it something that came out of maybe a prior interest? Do you feel like you even need to specialize as an amateur? If you're somebody who's struggling with having so many interests and not really having enough time to pursue them, let us know in the comments. Perhaps somebody will be able to help you. So as always, thanks for watching. I hope the video has been helpful and enjoyable. We'll see you in the next one. Cheers.